Hello everyone, Ace here, and today let's talk a little bit about the subject of free speech, particularly on the social media platform of YouTube, which, as I'm sure many of you are well aware, has been steadily eroded for years now, with the subject of content creators getting deplatformed and demonetized being one of the more famous talking points, with the number of YouTubers who have had to personally live through that being innumerable now. However, today's topic is going to be a little bit different, although along the same lines. As instead of talking about the relation of free speech to YouTube videos, today we're going to be focusing on the erosion of free speech when it comes to YouTube comments. Something that could be seen as a bit of a nitpick, although I would personally say that it is still very much an issue worth discussing, especially given the number of ways that YouTube has negatively impacted the ability of you, the viewer, to speak your mind. So now that we've gone past the 60-second mark, allow me to talk about some of the ways that YouTube seems intent on censoring you, the viewer, and some of the techniques that I personally use to combat these efforts of censorship by YouTube. The first thing to note, though, is that YouTube actually has multiple ways of censoring your comments. The first and most blatant example being to completely delete your comment off of the platform altogether. Naturally, I can't really provide much evidence in the way of this existing, for the obvious fact that YouTube deletes the evidence, but you can tell in some of my comments that I have to skirt around using certain combinations of words within the same comment. Because yes, even the channel owner will have their comments deleted if YouTube does not like certain words together within that same comment. As an example, check out my reply here to the letter M, where I state, quote, "The National Socialists were SJWs who claimed they were being systemically oppressed by those they viewed as the racial embodiment of capitalism, and thus couched their actions as, quote, punching up, unquote, against those they claimed they were being oppressed by." You will note that I did not specifically name the religious group that the National Socialists were specifically known for targeting. This is because YouTube does not like it when you put the phrases National Socialist and Jewish person in the same comment, regardless of where they are in the comment, or the context of what you are actively saying within the comment either. Utilizing these phrases together is simply verboten. Or at least it was for an extended period of time. For you see, YouTube likes to change up which exact words and which exact combination of words are not allowed on their platform. And no, they do not provide updates on which words are okay and which words are not. That is simply for you to discover after the fact. A good example of this being that YouTube used to consider discussions about the Holodomor to be forbidden, until the Ukraine war kicked off, after which it was mysteriously okay to suddenly admit on YouTube that the Holodomor was in fact a genocide that happened. And yes, you heard that right. YouTube used to engage in Holodomor denial before the war in the Ukraine. But the big takeaway here is that YouTube will happily censor topics on a whim and then uncensor them on a whim as well without telling anybody. Meaning that usually the only way that you'll know that certain words or combinations of words are forbidden is when your comment gets censored for them. Fortunately, this is one of the easiest methods of censorship to detect. All you have to do is wait 30 seconds and hit the refresh key. If it is still up, then chances are you have not been censored. If it isn't up, however, then that means that you'll have to rephrase your comment and post it all over again. For this reason, I highly recommend creating copies of comments that you believe may be censored by YouTube. As for the rephrasing, there are a number of ways to go about it. The first is to, of course, replace a word that YouTube deems problematic with a word or phrase that you believe YouTube won't detect. My response to the letter M is a good example of this, because instead of saying Jewish person, I referred to them as those that the National Socialists believed to be the racial embodiment of capitalism. And given that it was the Jewish people that the National Socialists believed were the racial embodiment of capitalism, I ultimately come out saying the same thing but with a different phrase. One that even highlights the increased comparison between National Socialism and modern-day SJWs. Of course, this is not the only way to go about it. Another option is to encode the certain forbidden word in ways that YouTube will not detect, such as is simply spelling the word backwards. For example, when debating far leftists here in the comments section, a reoccurring theme that I have managed to accomplish is to get a consistent number of these far leftists to openly admit that they are pro-rape. This is usually as a result of a discussion surrounding the super straight controversy. In response, I believe that it is perfectly reasonable to use the fact that these far leftists are pro-rape as an insult against them, and thus I will refer to them as rape lover. However, because the phrase rape lover is itself strictly forbidden, I typically solve the issue by simply spelling rape backwards, thus getting around YouTube censorship that way. If all else fails though, another tactic that I will utilize is to screenshot the comment the moment I post it, and then provide a link to the screenshot of that comment. That said, YouTube has been known in the past for automatically censoring comments that include links, so your mileage may vary with that one. But now that we've dealt with the first type of censorship that YouTube will utilize, let's move on to a more subtler type of censorship that YouTube has done for quite a while. That being to hide comments from the top comments section. The good news is that this type of censorship does not completely hide the comment altogether, as it can still be viewed if someone switches to the newest comments tab. Although make no mistake, this is still a deliberate attempt at making certain thoughts and ideas harder to see. The bad news is that far more words will be caught by this type of censorship. As one example, consider this recent meme video I made titled "So I Managed to Die While Already Being Dead," which is poking fun at the fact that your character can die in a Dragon Ball Z game whilst the character is already actively dead and on Snake Way. The reason this is an example of the sort of thing I'm talking about is that if you switch the comments section tab from top comments to newest first, you'll see one additional comment from a commenter known as Stefan Paskey, stating, quote, "Ever been so dead you go to double heaven." A legitimately funny joke, but one that has been subject to this form of soft censorship. And as far as I can tell, the reason for this course of action is because Stefan Paskey used the word dead in the comment. Sadly, it appears that this style of censorship can be harder to detect, as typically YouTube makes sure that your comments show up first, or at least among the first, when you search a specific video. Fortunately, there is still a way to detect this style of censorship, that being to log off and see if you can still find the comment in the top comments section. Although in videos with considerably more views and comments, this will likely be a difficult task, unfortunately. That said, if you do detect that your comment has indeed been subject to this form of soft censorship, then the good news is that you could create a new comment using the techniques that we have discussed earlier to try to avoid this circumstance. Although you should be made aware that YouTube is known for censoring people who post multiple comments, presumably on suspicion of spam. So these are the two older ways that YouTube will engage in censorship that I know about. But let's now move on to a third method that appears to be more recent and more sinister in its application. This third type of censorship works by making the user believe that their comment is actually visible, but then hiding the comment from everyone but the person who posted it. A good example of this is the recent discussion with C, which was on the super straight controversy. Now you'll see in this discussion that there are supposedly 61 replies. However, if you actually count the number of replies that are actually visible, the grand total number is only 47, meaning that 14 comments, or well over a fifth of the entire discussion, is simply missing to the regular viewer. Although the person that posted those comments will still see them, and most likely not even realize that they are in fact being censored. What makes this type of censorship the most sinister, in my opinion, is the fact that the purpose behind it is to trick the people posting the comments into believing that they are not actually being censored, which would result in them not trying to go around the censorship. This is censorship that is meant to counter people who actively try to counter the attempts of censorship already placed upon them. The good news is that this type of censorship can still be detected. For example, counting the number of comments is a good start if you are not one of the commenters yourself, as it will show that yes, this type of censorship is in play if there is a discrepancy in the numbers. However, if you are one of the commentators and suspect that your comment may be subject to this type of censorship, then the way to tell would be to simply log off and see if you can still find your comment. If not, then you will once again have to utilize the same methods that I have already discussed previously to get around YouTube's attempts at censoring you. So I know this is a lengthy video, however the sad reality is that it is a lengthy video specifically because of YouTube's actions. But the good news is that this should hopefully be a useful guide to detect and counter YouTube's various forms of censorship. censorship. Of course, given how YouTube is, that may be unfortunately subject to change, and thus I may have to make a follow-up video at some point later down the line. But in any case, this has been Ace. Hope to see you guys again soon. Take care. Ace out.